Good morning. I'm a little bit early today, and I guess I know that's okay. Today we look at 2 Corinthians chapter 8, and Paul begins this uh, chapter with, we want you to know, brothers and sisters, about the grace that God has granted to the church of Macedonia. And Macedonia was another area further up north than where they were up around um, Tyre and that. I think north of Philippi and Thessalonica. But this was one of the poorer regions. These people, and Paul will say that, they had an ordeal of affliction, their abundant joy, and in their poverty, more or less, they were very generous in the giving for the benefit of the church. And this was one of the things that um, had been happening in Corinth, was that there was an offering being taken or given um, for the churches in Jerusalem and that missionary that way, or the mission that way. And Titus was one who was, Titus and Paul and others were entrusted to take that donation back, and it wasn't like today where they could, write a check or send a money order or do that. I mean, they had to physically take whatever it was, gold or silver, and carry it. And, and thinking about that, the risk in some ways that put them at as well. Um, but the Church of Macedonia, anyway, he said they have from their extreme poverty, they have overflowed in a wealth of generosity. And it's one of those things that, it's like Jesus' story of the widow putting in her only coin. That they felt so moved by the Holy Spirit, so moved by this gift of grace and love from God, and their belief and trust in Jesus Christ that they gave. And Paul said they gave way more than I ever dreamt that they would. They gave out of their poverty, they gave extremely generously. And the reality is that, we don't have to beggar ourselves. I've said that before. We don't have to give everything we have to the church or to that way, but, and what we do give should be out of thanksgiving, not out of duty, and that's, we don't have requirements, as to you have to give so much or you can't be a member, and that's just not it. I mean, God's grace is free. There's no charge for it. And so whatever you give is a responsive thank you to God that way. And so this church in Macedonia gave, and he says, verse 3, I can testify they voluntarily gave according to their means and even beyond their means, begging us earnestly for the privilege of sharing in this ministry. It wasn't that, Paul and Titus were demanding it, but these people were offering. And that's why we call it our offering today, and I remember sometimes it was taking up the collection. Well, when you take up a collection, it sounds to me more like something that you are obligated to do. And, if it's like you're collecting your debts. But the offering we give is what we give freely. And he says they gave themselves first to the Lord by the will of God, and then they gave this generous amount. And he doesn't specify, and that's another thing too, is that, I mean, if somebody writes a generous check to the church, I don't want to know about it, but the church knows about it. And I think about, how if it wasn't for the offering from the giving, we wouldn't be able to function. We wouldn't be able to keep the heat on and the lights on and all that. So it's a giving. It's a wanting to do something for the community of God that way. And he's writing out to the people of Corinth in verse 7. He says, now as you excel in everything, patting them on the back a little bit, just saying that, you are a good group of people. You excel in faith, speech, knowledge, eagerness, and we want you to excel also in this generous undertaking. So he is kind of saying to them that, we'd like you to be generous in your giving, to be generous in your thankfulness. And I think about that as with Thanksgiving Day, the one day out of the year that we set aside to be intentional, that way. And the gospel text for Thanksgiving Day is the story of the 10 lepers and the one that came back filled with thanksgiving for his healing. So it's when we take time to be aware of how thankful we should be, and it isn't just the one day that we do that. I know that that we are thankful every day. We say thank you to people for many things and different times, but also, I think I don't know how we can not be aware of how thankful we are to God. We see the sunrise, we see the rain comes when and we see so many different things that have been a part of God's creation. And so we have those thankful hearts. And then, he says in verse 7, I hope that you are generous in your giving. In verse 8, I do not say this as a command, but I am testing the genuineness of your love. He's not commanding them to give, but he's encouraging them. And sometimes, I've heard, of pastors that always preach about money. They always ask about money. And I think that's, the wrong approach. We need, as our churches, to be places of welcoming, to be places of community, to places that we feel good to go and we enjoy going and enjoy visiting with those that are there. And it was yesterday I talked about, the joy, the gospel text where the lost coin and the lost sheep. But both of them, when they were found, it was the joy in heaven. And sometimes, as I said yesterday, we forget to focus and to think about that joy. What brings us joy? What joys are there in our lives each and every day? And if we can make our communities, especially our community of our church, as a place of joy, not a place of, oh, I got to go again, or I got to do this, or I got, and instead of putting the burden on people, to make it a place that they enjoy being, and that's one of the things that, so I'll complain about having to have another sermon, I do that, but yet, the joy of being together with God's people is, it's one of those things that I enjoy, that to be together. And so it takes some of the work, as to speak that way, of preparing a sermon. It makes it not so bad because of the. Okay, I had a bad signal, so I moved. I got a little bit better signal. But I just, to kind of wrap up this chapter, they're talking about, the collection is going to be going to Jerusalem. They're talking about working together for the good of God in and through all things that way. And how God is generous in all things. And just as the people of Macedonia, it says they gave out of their poverty because of their thankfulness. We give too because of our thanksgiving. And we look. I don't know. We don't always look just at ourselves, but we look at our community and we look at the worldwide community as being the church of God. And so this is one of the things that we do together as community of church, and I'm not just talking about the individual church in an individual town, but the church as a whole. And that includes people of all different faith denominations, that as we live our lives, that we do so much good for the will of God.